Before the United States existed, before a flag, before a constitution, before anyone could say with confidence that this rebellion would survive, there were spies. Not professionals, not soldiers, not agents trained by a government, but farmers, merchants, sailors, civilians living under occupation. In 1778, New York City wasn't an American city. It was the center of British power in North America, a fortified, surveyed, occupied territory. British troops controlled the streets. Loyalists filled the taverns. Informants were everywhere. And inside that environment, a small civilian network quietly began collecting information. Who was moving? What ships were arriving? Where troops were positioned? What the British were planning next? If they were discovered, there would be no trial, no prisoner exchange, no protection, just execution. This wasn't espionage in service of a nation. This was espionage to create one. And that's the story we're telling today. Not about heroics or legend, but about design. Because long before the United States had borders or agencies, it was already practicing national security. Let's talk about it. Hey everybody, welcome to Midweek Sitrep, your bi-weekly briefing on national security and the forces that shape it. My name is Jerry Fowler, and I'm your host. Every other week, I give you the context you need to see what's really going on so you can stay mission-focused. Today, we pause our normal programming to honor and celebrate 250 years of the United States of America. Now, this episode is called National Security by Design. You've probably heard phrases like privacy by design or security by design. The idea that you don't bolt protection on after something breaks. You build for risk from the start. And that's exactly what happened here. The United States didn't discover national security in the 20th century. It didn't invent it after World War II. It didn't stumble into it during the Cold War. It was built through it. Intelligence, economic leverage, secrecy. Not as ideology, but as survival tools. This episode is about how a fragile rebellion learned to survive in a hostile world, and why those early decisions still shape American power today. Let's get into it. From the very beginning, George Washington understood something most people didn't. He could not outfight the British Empire. The Continental Army was smaller, worse equipped, inconsistently funded, often on the brink of collapse. But Washington had learned something earlier, in the French and Indian War, that bad intelligence gets armies killed. By the late 1770s, he was explicit about it, saying there's nothing more necessary than good intelligence. So Washington did something unusual for a revolutionary leader. He invested in information. Not speeches, not symbolism, but visibility. In 1778, he authorized what became known as the Culper Ring, a civilian intelligence network operating inside British-occupied territory. This wasn't a formal agency. There were no ranks or uniforms or buildings. But there was tradecraft, coded letters, invisible ink approved by Washington himself, dead drops to avoid direct contact, couriers crossing Long Island Sound at night, messages routed through multiple hands so no one knew the whole picture. Most importantly, the sources blended in. They weren't obvious spies. They were just there. The Culper Ring didn't win the war. That's important to say clearly. What they did was prevent surprise. They gave Washington early warning. They provided context. They reduced uncertainty. and in war where a single surprise could have ended everything. That mattered. Intelligence alone doesn't secure independence. The early United States of America faced another problem, one that rarely gets framed as national security, and that's economic dependence. Britain didn't just dominate militarily. It dominated trade, markets, shipping lanes, finance, access. Even after independence, the new republic was economically fragile, dependent on foreign markets, foreign shipping, foreign credit. The founders understood something uncomfortable but true. Political independence without economic leverage is temporary. So they experimented, sometimes clumsily, with economic tools. Non-importation agreements, trade restrictions, embargoes. The most famous and most controversial came under Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson's embargo is often taught as a failure, and economically, it largely was. But strategically, it revealed something crucial. The young United States understood that denying access could shape behavior. That you didn't always need force, you needed leverage. This was the early logic of economic statecraft. Not fully developed, not always successful, but intentional. Now we get to the most uncomfortable part of the story: secrecy. The United States is built on ideals of transparency, accountability, and public trust. But from the very beginning, the founders understood a hard reality. Total transparency is incompatible with survival in a hostile world. Intelligence sources had to be protected. Diplomatic negotiations had to be private. Military plans couldn't be debated in public. This tension existed before the Constitution formalized executive power. Washington guarded his sources. Correspondence was coded. Certain decisions were deliberately kept quiet, not to undermine democracy, but to preserve it. Secrecy wasn't a betrayal of the Republican values. It was a condition for their survival. By this point in the story, a pattern starts to become clear. Intelligence wasn't gathered for curiosity or prestige. It was gathered because uncertainty was deadly. Knowing where the British were moving, or where they weren't, gave Washington the ability to choose when to act and when to wait. To avoid fights he couldn't win. To survive long enough for the next opportunity. Economic pressure served a different purpose. It wasn't about punishment or profit. It was about influence. When military force was too expensive, too risky, or simply unavailable, control over trade and access became a way to shape outcomes without firing a shot. And secrecy made both of these possible. Sources had to be protected. Plans had to be concealed. Leverage only worked if it wasn't exposed too early. None of these elements stood on their own. Information created advantage. Advantage made leverage possible. Leverage required discretion. Discretion preserved information. And through that cycle, repeated, refined, and tested under pressure, something rare began to take hold. Not just rebellion, not just resistance, but sovereignty. Not proclaimed once and secured forever, but earned incrementally, maintained daily, and defended through constant adaptation. This system existed before anyone named it, before it was written into law, before institutions formed around it. There were no agencies yet, no doctrines, no acronyms, but the architecture was already there, quietly doing its work. holding the republic together long enough for it to become real. At some point, the story stops feeling historical, not because the details changed, but because the pattern becomes familiar. When we talk about intelligence in the 1770s, about trade pressure and embargoes, about secrecy and discretion, I'm not describing a vanished world. I'm describing the same system, just operating at a smaller scale. Information didn't become a national security concern with the arrival of computers. It became one the moment knowing or not knowing meant survival. Trade didn't turn strategic with globalization. It became strategic when access could influence behavior without a single shot fired. Supply chains didn't start to matter when they failed. They mattered the moment dependence became leverage. Technology didn't suddenly become decisive. It has always been a way to see farther, move faster, and stay one step ahead. And information flows have always separated those who act from those who react. The logic hasn't changed, only the reach has. The founders didn't use the phrase national security. They didn't have that yet. But what they understood was the reality that visibility matters, that access is power, that discretion preserves legitimacy, and that no part of society is ever truly separate from the security of the whole. Everything is national security, not because power expanded over time, but because the world never stopped applying pressure. That truth existed at the beginning, and it's still shaping the present. This story isn't really about the past. It's about the systems you live inside of right now. Systems that didn't appear suddenly and didn't evolve by accident. The choices made in the 1770s did not stay there. They hardened into structures, ways of seeing, deciding, and exerting power that still shape how this country functions today. The United States wasn't built by flawless heroes or grand certainty. It was built by ordinary people operating under pressure, making consequential decisions with incomplete information, because the alternative was failure. That tension never disappeared. If any of this feels familiar, it's because you've already recognized the logic here. Monitoring your environment, protecting sensitive information, limiting access, avoiding surprises that could end the enterprise overnight. That's not modern jargon. That's survival governance. The principles we now associate with intelligence, compliance, and risk management didn't emerge from theories or frameworks. They were learned under stress, when mistakes had consequences, and then quietly carried forward. Even the legal structures came later. Executive discretion, secrecy, special authorities, trade controls. Those didn't arise because the government simply expanded. They arose because the country learned early that survival demands choices, and that some of those choices cannot be made in public, in advance, or without consequence. That's why debates about intelligence, secrecy, trade, and power never fully resolve. They aren't just policy disagreements. They're arguments about how a system designed to survive should operate in a world that keeps testing it. And once you see that, it's hard to unsee. As we approach America's 250th birthday, it's natural to reflect on the foundations that we can see. The flag that unites us, the speeches that gave voice to principle, the founding documents that articulated our ideals and bound power to law. Those things matter deeply. They express what the nation aspired to be. But alongside those ideals, something else was taking shape. A practical architecture for survival. A way of seeing the world as it was, not as we wished it to be. A set of habits, judgments, and systems built under pressure, not in opposition to the founding principles, but in service of them. The United States wasn't designed only to declare values. It was designed to endure long enough to live up to them. That endurance required foresight. It required discipline. It required the ability to recognize threats early, to protect sensitive information carefully, and to make hard decisions when comfort wasn't an option. This architecture didn't emerge from theory. It emerged from necessity. And it didn't stop evolving in 1776. It has been carried forward, generation after generation, by people who choose responsibility over ease, by men and women who give their time, their talent, their livelihoods, and often their safety to sustain something larger than themselves. Some stood watch in silence. Some carried burdens they could never explain. Some made decisions under pressure, knowing the cost of getting it wrong. And for some, that price was everything. This country exists not only because it was founded on ideals, but because people were willing to uphold the systems that protected those ideals, to defend them, to test them, to improve them, and when necessary, to give their lives in that effort. So when we debate intelligence, when we wrestle with secrecy, when we argue about trade, power, and security, that isn't a failure of the American experiment. It's evidence that the system is still alive, still adapting, still doing what it was built to do, and that's to endure. To those who have served, to those who still serve, and for those who never came home, thank you. Happy 250th, America. Here's to many more. And that's today's Sitrep. Make sure you keep up with Midweek Sitrep on Substack and YouTube for more on this and other topics. You'll find short clips, interviews, and bonus content. And if you want to support the show, check out our merch on everythingisnationalsecurity.com. Every shirt and hat helps keep us independent and growing. I'm Jerry Fowler, and remember, everything is national security. See you next time. Midweek Sitrep with Jerry Fowler is an independent production of OpScent Media Group, LLC. The information provided in this podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute legal, financial, or professional advice. Listeners should consult with a qualified professional before making any decisions based upon the content discussed. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host, Jerry Fowler, and any guest, and do not reflect the official policy, position, or endorsement of any current or former employer, client, government agency, military organization, educational institution, or any other entity for which the host, Jerry Fowler, may be affiliated. Mention of a company, product, or service does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation. Any references are provided for informational purposes only. This podcast does not disclose any classified, proprietary, or confidential information. All discussions are based upon publicly available information and personal expertise. Everything's national security. OpScent Media Group, LLC.